Today, we are wrestling with a topic that is profoundly personal, intensely cultural, and now, almost shockingly, entering the realm of automation. We're talking about the human voice.
Yeah, and think about your own voice for just a moment. That specific mix of sound, your pitch, the rhythm, the pronunciation, everything we call an accent. It's maybe the most instantaneous marker of who you are.
Involuntary, even.
Completely involuntary. It signals where you're from, your social background, the community you belong to. It really is, a core pillar of your personal identity.
It is, and yet, as the global digital economy just keeps expanding, that essential marker of self it's increasingly treated not as a richness to be celebrated, but as a liability.
A liability to be minimized, or with this new technological leap, a flaw to be filtered.
Exactly, filtered. Which is why today we're undertaking a deep dive into the world of AI-powered real-time accent modification.
Our mission here is to really examine the entire ecosystem around this highly controversial technology. We're going to look back at the long-standing and often really painful reality of accent discrimination.
Accentism is the term.
Accentism, yes. And how traditional fields like speech-language pathology have tried to ethically respond to it. And then, the big one, the highly disruptive entry of AI software into massive global industries, especially call centers.
And for this, we've synthesized a huge stack of source material. We're drawing from clinical literature reviews on ethical accent modification, from fierce academic critiques rooted in what's called ratiolinguistics.
I'll write that down.
We will.
Great.
And we also have specific case studies from companies deploying these tools. Sonas and Crisp are the big ones, plus data on business outcomes and the sort of overarching global regulatory climate for AI.
And what makes this discussion so critical and honestly so complicated is this central, almost irreconcilable conflict we found in the sources.
A real tension.
A huge one. On one side, you have AI presented as this pragmatic tool for economic empowerment. It's designed to fight back against ingrained listener bias, improve communication clarity, and create jobs for marginalized workers.
But then you have the opposing narrative, and this is one we really need to explore with full rigor, which views this exact same technology as a perpetuator of racialized power structures.
Right. They argue that it demands forced assimilation, that it enforces a kind of linguistic dominance that benefits the already powerful.
And ultimately leads to the erasure and the dehumanization of workers' authentic voices. So it's this tension between a perceived anti-discrimination tool and a very deep systemic linguistic violence.
We need to unpack both arguments in detail for you today. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with the very definition of the problem space. What actually is an accent, and why is that common phrase, getting rid of an accent, so fundamentally misleading? It's such a crucial starting point. The core professional understanding, especially from organizations like the American Speech Language Hearing Association, or AHA, is definitive on this. An accent is not a communication disorder.
Right, not a disorder.
Systematic variation in speech. It involves patterns of phonology. So the actual sounds you make and prosody, the rhythm and intonation, the music of your speech. And the undeniable truth is every single person has one.
Everybody. Even the people who think they don't have an accent.
Especially them. Their neutral accent is just the dominant accent of their particular community. It's fundamentally tied to identity. You can't easily separate how you sound from where you came from.
Because language is this profound vehicle for socialization, right? For community of belonging, sharing cultural identity. Our source material points out that, for instance, non-native accents happen because the underlying sound system and rhythm of a speaker's first language, their L1,
yeah.
it naturally influences how they pronounce words and phrase sentences in a second language, the L2. It's a transfer of rules. It is not a mistake.
Exactly. And this is precisely why, within the traditional framework of speech-language pathology, what they call SLP, accent modification is framed purely as an elective service.
Elective, so a choice.
A choice. It's completely distinct from the remediation of a communication disorder. Alyssa Pennington's literature review is crystal clear on this. Clinicians offer these services because some accents, when they interact with a specific listener community, can create this persistent communication friction.
And that friction, that can really affect someone's life.
Absolutely. It can affect intelligibility. And this friction leads people to seek help because maybe they're avoiding social interactions, or they're avoiding professional ones, or they are just experiencing chronic, exhausting difficulty in being understood.
Okay, so building on that idea of communication friction, the researchers, they helpfully break down how we measure a successful conversation into three distinct dimensions. And this is, I think, a crucial insight for you to understand how bias just creeps into the whole equation.
It really is. They define these three specific dimensions. So first, you have accentedness. This is the sort of objective degree of the accent when you compare it to the standardized speech patterns of the listener's community.
So just how different does it sound?
Basically, yeah. Second is comprehensibility. Now, this one is subjective. It's how much effort in the listener's perception is required to understand the speech.
The listener's perception of effort, that seems key.
It's everything. And then finally, you have intelligibility. And this is the measurable reality, the extent to which the listener actually decodes and understands the core message, the content itself.
And here's where it gets really interesting and where, the human element just complicates the whole technical measurement. The critical insight from all these linguistic studies is that a person can have a highly noticeable accent, so a high degree of accentedness,
A very strong
a
accent.
very strong accent, and still be perfectly clear and comprehensible, achieving high intelligibility.
Right. The message gets through.
The message gets through perfectly. Yet, and the sources are so quick to emphasize this, that subjective measure, comprehensibility, is profoundly contaminated by listener bias.
That's it. That is the absolute foundation of the problem. That's linguistic bias or accentism. Not all accents are treated equally in the social and economic sphere. It's just a fact.
And when you apply that filter of bias, what happens?
Well, a listener often perceives an accent as requiring excessive effort to understand, even when the speaker is technically perfectly intelligible. This perception of effort, it's not neutral. It leads to immense psychosocial pressure for people to modify their speech.
And the sources, they detail these very real, very material consequences of that pressure. People seek accent modification, not because their accent inherently prevents them from communicating, but because of pervasive discrimination and bias accentism, which creates these huge barriers in social life and education, and most crucially for our discussion today, in the workplace.
We're talking about severe professional impacts.
Yeah.
I mean, you might have workers who are constantly being asked to repeat themselves. Sorry, what was that? Could you say it again? Over and over.
Which is just exhausting and demoralizing.
It's incredibly demoralizing. Or they find that a listener's attention is consistently drawn toward how they are speaking, the accent, rather than what they're saying, the actual content of their message.
And that can cost them. It can cost them promotions. It can lead to them being marginalized on teams or even, being denied employment opportunities from the get-go.
And this isn't just a social slight. It has legal standing, which is important. We know from U.S. law, specifically Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that discrimination based on accent actually falls under the umbrella of national origin discrimination.
So it's illegal.
It is.
Yeah.
An employer is legally prohibited from discriminating unless, and this is the key phrase, unless that accent materially interferes with job performance. And they have to prove that.
And materially interferes is a very high bar to clear.
A very high bar.
Yeah.
And they must demonstrate strict impartiality regarding different types of accents. You can't just dislike one kind of accent.
Yeah.
But the very existence of this legislation and the fact that so many people across so many industries feel they have to seek out modification services.
Just a powerful proof of how pervasive and economically weighty this listener bias is.
It is. And this historical problem brings us to the traditional ethical response. So the SLPs, the speech-language pathologists, they have a very specific goal. It's to improve communication by enhancing intelligibility and naturalness while, and this is the important part, while fundamentally embracing the client's existing accent.
I think that distinction is so key. The goal of the traditional SLP approach is explicitly not to force the client to sound like a native speaker of the target language, like, say, standardized U.S. English.
No, not at all. That expectation, the sources note, is often linguistically unrealistic, and it can be psychologically harmful.
Yeah.
It just feeds into this idea that their current voice, their authentic voice, is somehow deficient or broken.
Which it isn't.
Which it is not. Furthermore, the SLP approach includes a critical ethical counseling role. So clinicians are actually tasked with educating clients about the natural nature of accents and the systemic linguistic discrimination they're facing.
So they're arming them with knowledge.
Exactly. They encourage self-advocacy, the idea that the speaker has the right to their own voice. And they're increasingly involved in educating peers and community members about effective listening strategies to mitigate that listener bias.
And that's the huge, almost radical pivot we mentioned earlier, right? shifting the burden of communication clarity away from the marginalized speaker and putting it onto the historically privileged listener.
Yes. Corporate training focused on listener skills, it addresses the cognitive biases that unconsciously influence our comprehension.
So you're training the manager, not the employee.
You're training the manager.
Yeah.
If you train a listener at a corporate level, you mitigate the effects of bias where that listener might ignore content or maybe delay acknowledging a point or assume incompetence based on the sound of a voice.
Or just react with frustration.
Or react with frustration simply because the accent falls outside their narrow, learned familiarity zone. This whole approach suggests that the labor required to fix systemic discrimination belongs with the system, not with the victim.
But as we're about to see, this philosophy of fixing the listener is precisely what these new AI solutions are bypassing entirely. And that leads us right to our central conflict.
Yeah.
So that deep-seated listener bias and the resulting historical need for workers all over the world to neutralize their accents, that's the systemic friction that AI developers identified as a multi-billion-dollar economic opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. The voice and speech recognition industry focused immediately on this massive, globally distributed market. Offshore call centers places with these huge talent pools in India, the Philippines, Latin America.
And these centers are the front line of customer interaction for most Western corporations, right?
They are. And the origin story of Sonos, one of the leading companies in this space, is absolutely essential to understanding the ethical tension we're talking about.
So the co-founder, Sharath Shavanarayana, he was personally and deeply motivated by his own trauma with accent-based discrimination, with accentism.
Yes, back when he worked in a Bangalore call center in 2003.
And the humiliation he faced it sounds profound.
It was. He was explicitly forced to adopt an anglicized name, Nathan, just to appease Western customers who were complaining about his Indian accent.
To take on a fake name.
A fake name. This demand to erase a part of his personal and cultural identity just to hold on to a job, that was the impetus for creating the software. So, the stated aim of Sonos is truly dual. It's to counter the accentism experienced by agents while simultaneously alleviating the documented frustrations of those customers.
So it's pitched as a technological solution to what is, at its core, a human rights issue.
That's the pitch.
But let's get into the mechanics of the solution itself. This is real-time accent conversion or accent alteration. What is the AI actually doing to the sound waves?
So the Sonos AI acts as this sophisticated, real-time voice filter. It captures the agent's voice, and then it outputs a modified signal that sounds, according to the critical academic analysis, more like idealized versions of white speakers of U.S. standardized English.
That's a very specific phrase, idealized versions.
It is. Now, importantly, the company claims it preserves the agent's core performance elements. Their authentic voice inflection, their pauses, their silences, their emotional tones. It just alters the phonetics and prosody to align with that dominant standard.
And this isn't just one company. This is a whole emerging industry. We're also seeing companies like the Office Gurus partnering with Crisp for their AI accent conversion.
Right. And Crisp's technology is slightly different in its stated goal. It uses deep learning algorithm to try to match the agent's accent to the customer's native accent in real time.
So if the customer's from Texas, it might add a bit of a drawl.
That's the idea, or it can just convert to a neutral English accent, which is often the default.
And technically, these solutions they're state-of-the-art.
Oh, absolutely. They're processing phonetic units, prosody, so the stress and intonation patterns that make speech sound musical or mechanical, and all these acoustic features, all of it in real time. The goal is conversational naturalness.
And crucially, a lot of this processing is done on device, right, on the agent's computer.
Yes, and that's so important for reducing latency. It ensures the conversation flows without that frustrating time lag that you get with, cloud processing.
But the real reason this technology is taking off isn't just because it's technically sophisticated. It's the economic engine behind it. The business results cited in the sources, particularly by Frost and Sullivan, who gave Sonos a big award in 2024, they are simply impossible for businesses to ignore.
We really should dissect these metrics because they are the core justification for deploying this AI. So Sonos reports enhancing customer understanding by a massive 31%.
31%.
And increasing customer satisfaction by 21%. I mean, these numbers directly impact the bottom line. Satisfied customers don't leave.
And beyond the customer metrics, the internal agent metrics are just as compelling.
Even more so, maybe. They claim a 36% reduction in employee attrition.
36%. If you're running a global call center, agent turnover is one of your largest, most crippling costs. Reducing attrition by over a third it's a monumental business achievement. It suggests agents are happier, they're staying longer.
And the efficiency metrics also just soar. A 43% increase in sales transfer rates and an 18% decrease in average handle time, or AHT.
So calls are shorter and more productive. The technology literally pays for itself many times over just by improving efficiency and reducing burnout.
It does. And maybe the most telling statistic, the one that really speaks to the underlying pressure on these agents. Sonos achieved a stunning 99.2% agent adoption rate in Manila on the very first day of implementation.
99.2%.
Yeah.
That's not just high adoption. That is near universal acceptance. That number tells you everything you need to know about the fear of racial abuse and accentism that workers face every single day.
That 99.2% is a tragedy disguised as a success story. It just underscores how desperate agents are to mitigate the abuse they receive. And on top of that, the technology enables what's called impact sourcing.
Impact sourcing, what's that?
This allows companies to tap into high-retention, lower-cost labor pools in, say, Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities within countries like India, where people often have stronger, more pronounced regional accents. Before AI, those accents were often a hard barrier to getting the job.
And now AO just filters it away.
Now AI converts that barrier into an economic opportunity.
So the problem this AI aims to solve, then, is the systemic daily exploitation and abuse of these offshored call center workers who have historically been forced to hide their authentic identities, use fake names, and neutralize their accents just to minimize the incessant accentism and racial abuse from Western customers.
Exactly. The proponents argue that the AI restores dignity and boosts agent confidence by shielding them from this abuse. There's this one quote from an agent in our sources that really just hammered this home. He said, "After the AI filter was implemented, it's been 45 days since I was last abused on a call."
45 days, that's powerful.
It is. Proponents suggest that AI should handle the tasks that are dehumanizing, like constantly managing racial prejudice, and that lets people focus on human empathy and cognitive skills.
But if the solution to constant abuse is to filter the identity of the person being abused, we have to ask, what are the profound unseen costs of automating assimilation? And that takes us directly into the deep, thorny ethical scrutiny from academia. This is where we have to engage with the most powerful and frankly, complex critique coming from sociolinguistics and critical AI studies. Because the critics argue that this entire industry, despite any claims of empowerment, is fundamentally problematic.
Yes, and it's problematic because it is engineered around the presumed superiority of one single type of speech. Standardized U.S. English.
One correct way to speak.
Exactly. The critical analysis, like the one from Payne and his colleagues, argues that this technology functions primarily to maintain and reaffirm linguistic dominance. By privileging the production of language that is generally perceived as whiter and monolingual, the technology fundamentally prioritizes the comfort of what they call the white listening subject.
Okay, let's slow down on that term. The white listening subject. Isn't that a huge generalization? Are all customers in the West who get frustrated by accents white listening subjects, or is that a framework for understanding systemic power?
That's a really critical distinction to make. The term doesn't necessarily refer to the listener's individual racial identity. It's not about pointing a finger at one person. It refers to the system of listening.
The cultural default.
The cultural default. The system that marks standardized U.S. English, which is often a linguistic practice associated with white middle-class speakers, as the normal, natural, or unmarked way of speaking. Everything else is a deviation.
So when the system is built around privileging that norm,
then the consumer, whose comfort is prioritized, becomes the proxy for that power structure. The demand, implicit or explicit, is that the worker conform to their linguistic comfort zone, no matter where that worker is in the world.
And that immediately links back to the colonial legacy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The argument is that colonialism profoundly shaped how people use language and navigate power relations globally.
Without a doubt. So when a call center worker in Manila is expected to perform based on standardized U.S. monolingual norms, the AI practice, in this critical view, is simply leveraging technology to reinforce that historical pursuit of colonial dominance.
And this critique connects seamlessly to a framework called racial capitalism.
Yes, from Cedric J. Robinson, who coined the term. He argued that capitalism isn't just about maximizing profits, it's fundamentally racial capitalism, a deep-seated means to gain economic or social value from the racial identity of another person. The system inherently depends on a racial hierarchy to function.
So how does that look in the call center context, even before AI gets involved?
Well, it looks like this. You have hidden, low-status, low-wage workers, often people of color in developing nations, who are being exploited for cheap, scalable labor. They're already required to conform linguistically, to adopt fake names.
Right, Nathan from Bangalore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The critical argument is that the AI technology just layers on a new, more advanced, more efficient layer of exploitation. The workers are treated as mere products, and their most intimate expression of identity, their voice, is altered and used for the profit of the corporation and the comfort of the privileged listener.
It becomes a technological manifestation of racial commodification. The technology manipulates how the worker communicates precisely for the comfort of that privileged listener. It's violating or violently changing the acoustic reality of the worker's voice to make their non-white identity less salient. That sounds like an erasure of the self in the service of profit.
That is precisely the language the critics use. Linguistic oppression. It's a coercive process that dictates which types of people are discursively allowed to exist in a professional context. And the core consequence, critics argue, is severe dehumanization and psychological stress.
Because the AI technology, it perpetuates these harmful ratio-linguistic ideologies. It frames the authentic language practices of racialized speakers as inherently deficient. Your voice is wrong.
That's the message. And if the agent is forced to hear their own voice, their own words, coming out of their headset filtered into the standardized, generic American tone, what is the psychological toll of that day in and day out?
It must be immense.
The sources suggest it leads to profound feelings of inauthenticity, deep worker stress, and ultimately burnout. I mean, call center workers already had notoriously high turnover rates because they have to manage their identity and deal with racial abuse. The critics view the AI as simply automating and institutionalizing that required assimilation. It institutionalizes the message that your authentic voice is not good enough.
A scholar quoted in our source material was quite stark in their assessment. They described the AI solution as erasing people as individuals, boiling everyone down to a homogenized mechanical voice that ignores all the beauty that comes from people's languages and dialects and cultures.
The ultimate flattening of global linguistic diversity.
Yeah. And this critique extends to how the company itself operates. Even when a company like Sanus points out with pride that, say, 90% of its employees are immigrants.
Right, which on the surface sounds great.
It does, but critics might scrutinize this as an example of what they call non-performative anti-racism.
And what does that mean?
It's a strategy that signals diverse representation, it suggests anti-racist intentions, but ultimately fails to genuinely commit to dismantling the underlying racist structures. Instead, it uses that diversity to gain profit within the established framework of racial capitalism. The company is, by its very engineering choice, attached to the idealized versions of the dominant culture, rather than choosing to challenge it.
And this tension is incredibly difficult because we have the founder's sincere motivation, rooted in his own personal trauma, fighting against this really deep structural critique.
He acknowledges the ethical problem head-on, doesn't he? He's quoted as saying, yes, this is wrong, and we should not have existed at all.
He does. But he justifies the existence of the technology by asking a pragmatic, almost impossible question. Do we then let agents continue to suffer racial abuse every single day?
I built this technology for the agents, is his argument. He even compared it to products like makeup, which exists because society imposes certain appearance standards.
It's a pragmatic response to an unjust reality. He is essentially saying,
Yeah.
since the world is cruel, I will provide a shield, even if the shield itself reinforces the demand for conformity.
And that is the perfect encapsulation of the dilemma. The AI offers immediate, measurable relief and economic access in an unjust system.
While the systemic solution proposed by the critics, it demands a revolutionary shift. Train the listeners, the consumers, to embrace linguistic variation, to shift the labor and the burden of bias mitigation onto the privileged party.
So the ethical debate really boils down to this. Is it morally justifiable to automate the symptoms of a social problem, accentism, which leads to massive profit, instead of doing the difficult, messy, non-profitable work of fixing the societal problem itself?
Which is listener bias. It's a huge question.
So the call center debate is the main battleground, but this AI voice modification technology, it's showing up in other high-stakes environments. And this lets us examine the ethical stakes outside of the immediate context of economic exploitation.
That's right. We can look at the entertainment industry, specifically the highly anticipated film The Brutalist. The director and editor confirmed that voice conversion technology was used to augment the Hungarian spoken by the actors, Adrian Brody and Felicity Jones.
So in this case, it wasn't about overcoming discrimination or dealing with customer abuse. It was about achieving this impossibly high standard of authenticity, specifically for native-speaking viewers.
Exactly. The editor, who was a native Hungarian speaker, revealed they used software called Respeecher to perfect the complex Hungarian vowels so accurately that, and this is a quote, not even locals will spot any difference.
Wow. So complete phonetic perfection.
That was the goal. And the proponents of this usage, like communications professor Rupal Patel, they frame this as an artistic choice, a positive evolution of traditional voice editing, or ADR.
So how is it positive?
They argue it was done for inclusivity, to ensure the authenticity of the performance wouldn't be questioned or mocked by the specific Hungarian audience. The actors still did the work. They learned the language, they performed the dialogue. The AI just polished the phonetic and acoustic reality of the performance.
But the underlying ethical worry, it really echoes the call center critique, doesn't it? Just applied to human artistic expression. The critics ask a very salient question. Are we scaffolding ourselves out of existence?
Right. If we use technology to perfect the language parts of a performance, does that remove the meaningfulness and the integrity of the actor's job? Does it diminish the craft?
And the human element of language acquisition is so critical here. Learning a language it's fundamentally tied to culture, to behavior, to psychological immersion.
It's not just making sounds. If AI removes the necessity for an actor to fully master and embody that linguistic reality, experts suggest a meaningful component of their craft. And maybe the authenticity of the performance itself is lost.
It risks making the actor just a scaffold, right? They're only needed to provide the initial breadth and intention while the AI performs the complex cultural labor of sounding correct.
Which brings us back to the call center world, where we can actually objectively compare the technical performance of these competing AI technologies in a related area: inbound noise cancellation.
So this is where the AI works to clear up the customer's noisy environment for the agent, not the other way around.
Exactly. And this technical comparison gives us an essential glimpse into the underlying quality and efficiency of the competing models for just processing voice in general.
So this technical evaluation was performed by CRISP, and they compared their models against Sonus's inbound noise cancellation solution. They focused on real-world, chaotic call center scenarios.
And he used several objective technical metrics, including the widely respected PLQA score.
Let's define PLQA for you, because it's the industry standard for measuring voice quality. PLQA stands for Perceptual Objective Listening Quality Assessment. A typical telephone call often scores around a 3.0 on its scale. A score of 4.5 is considered excellent.
Right. So a high PLQA score means high fidelity, it means naturalness, and the key findings were really telling. CRISP consistently outperformed Sonus in these objective metrics across all sorts of noise types: home sound, street noise, cafe chatter.
By how much?
CRISP reported an average improvement of plus 0.59 POLQA points over the Sonus output. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but in the world of audio quality, that is a significant, very audible leap in measurable quality. It suggests their output sounds dramatically clearer and more natural to the ear.
And what's particularly noteworthy is how Sonus's performance sometimes actually degraded the sound.
Yes. In the Meta Audio Box Aesthetics evaluation, Sonus's output sometimes scored lower than the original noisy audio and listening quality metrics.
So it made it sound worse than just leaving the noise in.
In some cases, yes. This is a critical technical failure. The analysis suggested that while the Sonus model might successfully remove some background noise, it could introduce audible artifacts or a kind of residual robotic noise that actually degrades the overall listening experience for the agent.
And that links right back to the ethical critique of the voice being mechanical or homogenized. If the tech processing isn't flawless, the shield the agent receives introduces its own level of unnaturalness and distraction.
And this relates directly to deployment differences, specifically audio bandwidth. CRISP's analysis noted that their model supports up to 16 kilohertz audio quality,
which is high-definition audio. It's crucial for capturing the richness and nuances of the human voice.
It is. Sonus's maximum audio quality, as of the analysis date, was 8 kilohertz.
And the difference between 16 kilohertz and 8 kilohertz is it's profound in this context. 8 kilohertz is the historical telephony standard. It's why things sound thin, digitized, or on the phone.
Exactly. So if your accent alteration technology is already starting at 8 kilohertz, you are inherently limiting the fidelity and naturalness of the voice you're trying to create. It just exacerbates that perception of an artificial voice.
So in the subjective crowdsourced A/B testing, where real people just chose which audio sounded more pleasant and clear, crisp was preferred over sonus by a significant margin.
It was, which suggests that even as a pragmatic tool for clarity, the technology's execution quality is highly variable, and poor technical quality can actually undermine the entire goal of clear communication by introducing these distracting artifacts.
So even if you set aside all the deep ethical debates about assimilation and linguistic violence, the technical reality is that you are deploying highly complex real-time audio conversion, and the underlying quality and fidelity vary significantly among the leading competitors.
The speed of development and the sheer complexity of the controversy surrounding AI accent alteration, it just highlights a massive challenge. Technology is developing so much faster than global governance can keep pace.
We really need to frame this technological debate within the context of global AI governance, which, as we've seen in other deep dives, is profoundly fragmented.
That fragmentation is crystal clear when you compare the three major global approaches to regulating AI. You have the U.S. approach, which, particularly under recent administrations, has focused heavily on voluntary guidelines, best practices, and federal oversight using frameworks like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework.
This stance, it prioritizes innovation and competitiveness, right? It's often very cautious about regulating the private sector too aggressively.
It is. But critics argue this leads to a huge problem.
Yeah.
Without strong federal law, you get this patchwork of varying state laws. And that complicates compliance for companies. But more importantly, it leaves these massive regulatory gaps regarding fairness and civil rights in AI deployment.
And in sharp contrast, you have the European Union. With their landmark EU AI Act, they've adopted a definitive horizontal risk-based approach.
Right. They classify AI systems into different risk categories: low, limited, high, unacceptable. And they place really strict requirements on those deemed high risk. They're focusing heavily on issues like ethical considerations, transparency, and consumer protection. Their goal is to set a global standard for ethical AI.
And then there's the third major player, China, which features a heavy government role. They use a vertical, technology-specific framework that's heavily influenced by national security and economic goals.
So they're regulating specific areas like deep synthesis and generative AI services, giving the state very tight control over the content that's produced and the data that's used.
For our discussion, the central issue is how bias is addressed, or, often not addressed, within this fragmented regulatory landscape. Policymakers everywhere are aware of potential problems like bias and inaccuracies in AI-generated output.
They are. The U.S., for instance, tracks federal AI uses through the AI Use Case Inventory, aiming for transparency for oversight. But that's tracking, not regulating private industry.
So if we connect this all back to voice, the speed of AI development means that the sociolinguistic biases are often baked into these systems before regulators can effectively intervene or even fully define the harm.
Absolutely. The underlying preference for standardized U.S. English, which necessitates and underpins this entire accent alteration industry, is an ingrained bias that exists while regulatory bodies are still debating the definitions and enforcement standards for fairness.
The deployment of these technologies, which is justified by these powerful business metrics, it just runs ahead of the law.
And in the U.S., enforcement against discrimination and bias in automated systems generally has to rely on existing civil rights laws that were not designed for algorithmic systems. There's a robust debate in Congress now about creating new regulations to address AI-specific risks like mandatory impact assessments or third-party audits, but it's a slow, grinding process.
It's truly a race against the clock. A very rapid, very successful development of accent alteration technology serves as a perfect case study for the entire problem of AI governance. You have systems being deployed that reinforce racialized linguistic hierarchies at a massive scale.
Justified by immediate business metrics and the alleviation of worker suffering, long before global governance can define and enforce standards related to fairness and civil rights and communication technology.
We are, in effect, automating assimilation while the world is still debating the ethical framework.
That's a powerful way to put it.
So, if we look at the whole picture, from the linguistic reality that an accent is identity, to the trauma of accentism in a Bangalore call center, all the way to the deployment of these complex, real-time AI filters, The central, profound tension is just unmistakable.
It really is. On one hand, AI is delivering immediate, measurable business benefits and, crucially, personal confidence boost to marginalized workers. It reduces racial abuse, it increases job retention in developing economies, it's offering access to opportunities previously closed off by listener bias.
And yet, simultaneously, it reinforces the very harmful linguistic hierarchies and racialized demands, that system built for the white listening subject that made the technology necessary in the first place. It is a high-tech surrender to systemic injustice.
We have seen that AI accent modification technology fundamentally functions as a high-tech solution to satisfy the listener's bias, rather than demanding that the listener perform the cultural and cognitive labor required to evolve beyond that bias.
Right. The critical alternative proposed by scholars, training the consumer to embrace linguistic diversity, it shifts the labor back where, they argue, it belongs.
So if society, driven by economic efficiency and customer comfort, chooses to outsource that difficult, messy social labor, the work of fixing systemic bias, to an algorithm, we have to ask ourselves, what is the true long-term cost of allowing technology to perform assimilation?
What does society lose in terms of cultural richness, human connection, and ethical integrity when we choose to automate the symptoms of injustice, the complaints, the attrition, the abuse, instead of eradicating the injustice of listener bias itself?
That is a question this technology forces us all to grapple with, and it's a question we are only just beginning to answer.